About 2 months ago, I took up a night shift at a hospital near my house. It's the night shift, and it's in the rural part of my state, so it's seldom busy. In fact, it gives me a good break from my busy college schedule, and it gives me experience hours for my major, which is required to graduate, so really, it does me a lot of good. However, over the past month, some strange things have been going on that me and the rest of the staff have noticed. It all started about a month ago. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed that there was a strange man, a very tall and thin individual, who would stand in the darkest part of the parking lot. Since I showed up after the sun had gone down, I never saw the man in full light, but from what I could tell, he was roughly 6.5 to the upwards of 7 feet tall, a very large individual. He had long, bony fingers and a bald head. He always would wear black, and I couldn't really make out a lot of features on the man since he always was in the dark shadows. Every night after I would enter the hospital, I rarely thought about the man. That is until 2 weeks ago, when apparently someone let the man into the hospital and led him to a visitor's room that he had requested to visit. After leaving, roughly 30 minutes after he entered the room, the patient suffered a massive blood loss and passed away in the early morning. We tried to find him on the security tapes, but it amounted to nothing. I haven't seen him since. That is, of course, until, well, last night. I saw the man standing in the same spot of the dark parking lot. For a little bit of context, there's various rows in this parking lot located behind the hospital. These rows include cars, bikes, and pedestrian lanes. I decided I would confront the man and ask him what he had to do involving this strange, mysterious death that had occurred. As I was walking to him, I was hit by the front end of a large truck, and I blacked out. From what I can remember, I woke up in the hospital confused. I was laying in one of the beds. I was familiar with the room since I had nursed there for about 2 months, and my friend Nancy entered the room with a glass of water. "You got hit pretty hard there, huh?" "Yeah, I did. I saw that man again." She had a very offset look in her eye, but she smiled, handed me the water, and left the room. I realized I was in ICU, so they had to check on me every once in a while. I heard footsteps approaching my room and figured it was Nancy, but to my horror, it was the man. He entered and closed the door behind him, approaching my bed. He looked at me with the strangest look I had ever seen. I wanted to say something, but my sheer fear kept me from it. His long, bony nails reached down, grabbing the cord attached to my arm, and yanked it out. I then began to feel woozy and I just wanted to... Staff report. This is Nancy. Just wanting to clarify on the recent death of Cindy, my good friend and fellow nurse. We don't know what happened to Sydney. All we know is she was hit by the front end of a car and placed into ICU. We found her, the door wide open, with blood drips on the floor. We believe she has suffered from a massive blood loss, and her loss will be a great one to the hospital and to my life. When I was in elementary school, I took up being the safety patrol in 5th grade. It was a pretty fun experience considering I wanted to be a police officer when I got older. Not to mention I got to wear a sweet badge and a rope around my waist. However, the popularity of that seemed to fade when I entered middle school, and I decided to join the Crime Stoppers Club, the club led by the deputy at my middle school. There weren't many students in it since we were kind of seen as losers, but I thought it was a fun club and a good experience, especially if I was going to deal with crime in the future. I really wanted to get down to the nitty-gritty of crime going on at my school, but I figured there wasn't going to be much going on, seeing that most of the students couldn't drive and we really didn't have much money at all. That is until one day when I was in math class, and I overheard two students wearing hoodies sitting in the back talking about a deal of some sort behind the gym after school. This got me intrigued. A deal, I thought. What kind of deal? And then it hit me. Drugs. I figured they were going to be smuggling drugs or trading them or some sort, so I figured if I could get some photo or video evidence of this drug deal going on, perhaps I could get promoted in the club. So, after school, when the bell rang, I ran to my locker, grabbed my backpack, got my phone, and headed behind the gym. No one was there yet, so I took station in a small bush and waited. About 20 minutes later, a group of 4 kids arrived. They stood in the shade behind the gym and pulled out small black baggies and exchanged them. Some handing over money, some taking the bags, and some just standing watching. All of the kids were similar in height. They had pale skin and wore hoodies. They were kind of strange, and if I had to guess, I would say they were goth or something. They left, and I had the photo and video evidence I needed, but one thing was missing. I didn't know what was inside of the baggies. Thankfully, I happened to know one of the kids. A friend of mine from a class I took last year. I decided to approach one of them and ask them what was going on. When I acknowledged the black baggies, he told me to leave them alone and to never mention it again. He slammed his locker and left. I figured I would have to return and wait for another deal. So, for the next month, I would go behind the gym and wait just to see if there were any deals going on. And finally, I got my wish. Another group of kids returned, this time a group of 6 kids, with the 4 returning ones and 2 new students. They pulled out the black baggies again, but this time as one student was handing it to another, it dropped and broke. I was waiting for white powder perhaps to fall out, or maybe even pills. But, to my confusion, it was a sack of blood. Just blood. At least I think it was blood. It was red and liquid, and then I realized, why would students be trading blood? Then all at once it hit me. Standing in the shadows, tall, pale skin, blood. I've read my fair share of horror comics. These were vampires. I didn't have a steak or garlic on me, so I just started running. But they must have noticed me because they took chase, following me into the woods behind my school. I tried to hide, but they found me. They pulled me into a dark part of the forest underneath some trees and began to open their mouths, revealing these large, sharp fangs. I kicked and tried to run away and scream, but they all held me down. Right before one of them sank their giant fangs into my neck, the sun must have come out behind the clouds because they all shrieked and ran away, back to the school, back to the shade. I picked up my belongings, panting, grabbing my phone and flipping through the pictures, only to realize that none of them showed up. Again, because they're vampires, they obviously wouldn't show up on camera. I sighed, trembling. and made my way back to the school. I tried to explain to the principal what had happened, but my story was too far out there, and he requested me to talk to the school counselor. Suffice it to say, I left the school. I remember pulling away, watching those 6 kids staring at me. I never want to go back to that town or school, and I hope the people there will realize what kind of things those kids really are. I'm thankful to be alive. I don't want to know what would have happened had I gone down into the basement. For some context, about a month ago, an elderly couple moved next door to me. They were in their 70s or maybe 80s, so they didn't come out of their house much. The only times I would see them is sometimes they would come by late at night, offering cookies or brownies, or for the old man to ask if I ever wanted to watch old movies or sports games. I politely declined. But then one day the old woman asked if I wanted to mow their lawn. She said that they had a mower and gardening supplies in their basement, but they couldn't do the work since the mower was too heavy and that the sun was too hot for their skin. They offered me a fair sum of money, roughly $50, so I had to accept. Besides, I wanted to help out the elderly as much as I could. So, the following day, I decided I would go over earlier and try to get the work done. They requested that I waited until the nightfall, but I thought it was a little too late to be mowing a lawn. So at about 3 o'clock, I knocked on the front door, to no answer. However, as I was leaving, I noticed that the door was unlocked as I shook the knob. I cracked open the door and whispered their names. "Hello?" I said. I didn't hear any response. I thought, though, it might be a nice surprise if I got the work done early. So I opened the door, closed it behind me, and made my way toward the door which I assumed was for the basement. I creaked it open and looked down into the black darkness. As I was about to step down, I decided it might be a good idea to flip on my phone flashlight. But when I did, my stomach dropped. Hanging from the rafters in the room were 2 4-foot-long bats. Large, brown, hairy bats. I freaked out, slammed the door, ran out of the house, and back into mine. I was deathly afraid of rats, bugs, and especially bats. So I stayed there until the next day, actually. The next day, I thought it might be a good idea to go over to the elderly people's house and see how they were doing, and apologize for breaking in. But when I got over there, I noticed a large amount of police cars. Apparently, they never had a permit to live in the house regardless. There was no furniture, after all, inside of the house, except for the basement. And in the basement, they found various ropes and other tools, duct tape, a chair, a dim light, etc. They also found no food inside of the house, and from what I could tell, the bed was never slept in. They never did find the elderly couple, and I don't know what happened to those bats, but apparently, large bats like that don't live in the area that I live in. I don't know what to make of this, but something tells me there's a bit more going on than meets the eye.